Welcome to 10 Minutes in the Word. Through the main part of Hebrews 2, from 5 to the end, our preacher is responding to an anticipated objection from his listeners to the effect that although Christ may well have been superior to the angels, as he so clearly demonstrated in chapter 1, when he became man and became lower than the angels, and more than that, suffered as a man, surely that negates his superiority, at least for his time on earth. And in verses 5 to 13, the preachers argue that actually his becoming a real man and suffering was vital to his ministry because he fulfilled and restored what man had lost in the fall. He might have been made lower than the angels in terms of his voluntary humiliation and taking on human form, but he was never inferior to the angels. Now in 14 to 18, he's going to show that Christ's humanity and suffering was vital to enable him to help his brothers, his children, those who are saved through his atoning death. Christ's superiority is not cancelled out or negated by his becoming man and suffering and even dying as a human. In fact, it's precisely in his suffering and in his going to the cross and in his dying for sinners that he shows just how superior he is. Now, there are two parts to this reasoning. First, 14 to 15. He says, in order to be able to destroy Satan, the one who has the power of death, and deliver all those who through fear of death were subject to lifelong slavery, he had to be one of them. He's linking back to verse 13. If the children that God had given to Christ were to be sanctified and saved, then he, Christ, must, in every respect, partake of the same things, i.e., flesh and blood. No angel could do that. So how could you possibly imagine that angels are greater than Christ the man? No angel could do what Christ did. By becoming a true man, by entering into our very human nature, by subjecting himself to the evil people who were, of course, actually subject to him. Remember verse 9? He gave himself up to death, and in so doing he won a great victory over Satan and set captives free. So, for the believer now, there's no fear of death, or there need not be any fear of death. Because as Paul said to the Corinthians, the sting of death is sin, and the power of sin is the law, but thanks be to God, who gives us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ. The second part of this argument certainly includes verses 17 and 18, but it's not completely clear where verse 16 belongs. For surely it is not angels that he helps, but he helps the offspring of Abraham. The question is our preacher finishing what he's just been saying, or is he moving into a new thought? Is he saying that Jesus didn't die for angels, which is why he had to become real flesh and blood? Or is he talking about the sort of help that he provides for believers, as he says at the end of verse 18? He is able to help those who are being tempted. My own hunch is that it is the latter, partly because of the therefore, which opens verse 17 and seems to be drawing on the statement in verse 16. You see, Jesus' true humanity and suffering was absolutely vital, because only somebody who was completely and totally human could die on the cross and satisfy the wrath of God and set sinners free from the vice-like grip of Satan. But it was also absolutely necessary so that he could not only make that sacrifice of propitiation, but so that even today he can serve as a merciful and faithful priest in the service of God. Angels can't help us. They haven't got a clue. They live in the rarefied atmosphere of glory. They're constantly in the Father's presence. They haven't walked where we walk. They haven't faced what we face. They haven't felt what we feel. And more than that, not only they haven't, they simply can't. They're not flesh and blood. They're not prone to all the weaknesses of the flesh and vulnerable to temptation and trial. You would scan the ranks of the angels for someone, for one angel that you could in any way relate to. But we see Jesus. Angels can serve us, as we have seen, but they can't help us in the way Christ can and does. That word help that's in verse 16 and 18 comes to the idea of a parent running to help when they hear their child crying in distress. Brothers and sisters, as we'll see when we get to the end of chapter 4 of Hebrews, right now we have in heaven, and always, not a well-meaning, well-intentioned angel, not even Michael himself or Gabriel. Perish the thought. We have a sympathetic, merciful, and faithful high priest who shares our very nature, who is fitted for his role, made perfect as our preacher through suffering. The suffering of temptations and trial, the suffering of the cross. We have a high priest who has been tempted, note this, in every way just as we are, yet without sin. You and I never need to fear that we might cry out to our high priest in our time of trial or temptation, only to hear him say, I would like to help you, I really would, but I have no idea what you are going through. Matthew Bridges, the hymn writer, wrote that great hymn, Crown Him with Many Crowns. And that hymn includes a verse sometimes strangely left out in modern hymn books. It's a shame because it's a very precious truth that it's communicating to us. This is what it says, Crown him the Son of Man, who every grief has known that wrings the human breast, and takes and bears them for his own, that all in him may rest. Far from becoming inferior through becoming and suffering as a man, Christ demonstrated his immeasurable superiority by doing and continuing to do for us, his brothers, his children, what no angel could ever possibly do.